Well, ladies, welcome back. All right, here we go. To the huge topic tonight is going to be a tough one to get through for me. I probably get embarrassed a few times. I will say, anybody who may be watching this later, I don't see anybody right now in the room, but if you have any small children around, you might want to put headphones in because there will be a few words that tonight that will might not be for little ears, or if you're watching on a recording later, because we are talking tonight about women and the sexual purity movement. So in general, the sexual purity movement, and then also more specifically, we're going to talk about how this affects women, because we're continuing our series about that I call Women Break Free, finding ways that women throughout history, especially in the last 30, 40, 50 years or so, have been put, as we have in society begun to come into more freedom, but in our culture have been more. Oh, my TV just turned on. Hold on a second. Well, that's not gonna look good on recording, but sorry about that. All of a sudden a sound in the room. I'm saying get a hold of your children, and I can't get a hold of my technology. Okay, so anyway, so that's what our topic is going to be tonight, we're just going to go ahead and jump in as usual. You know, go ahead and mute if you want to, but if you have any questions, or if I'm not explaining something and going too fast, going too slow, whatever, let me know, and we're just going to go ahead and dive in though. So you guys should all see our main screen. 3:15, always be ready. From 1 Peter 3:15, we want to always be ready to give an answer for the hope that we have, the hope that we have in Christ for all aspects of our life, including this concept of our sexual ethic and sexual identity and things like that, that is a part of our human existence. So our title this week, our topic is Women and the Evangelical Purity Culture. You know that evangelical is a term that is an American term for the most part, that has to do with sort of the main Protestant denominations and their ideas, their theology, their Christianity, and their evangelistic ideas, it has its own culture, that it is something that is a little bit different than, say, Catholicism, which is Christianity, but a different, would not be considered evangelical. It's a little bit different. Usually you think of like the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Protestant denomination, and things that are similar to that as being evangelical. So that's mostly what I'm talking about tonight. And those who go to my church, or who are somehow connected with the church that I go to, that you guys know of, Glory of Zion, who also, of course, is a sponsor of this. Oh, and I should probably say, I'm saying things that may not be endorsed by the higher ups, so I'll just go ahead and not throw them under the bus in case I say anything stupid. But this class, these lessons that I do are part of that. So this term purity culture that I want to talk about is an idea that came about in the late 90s. As we know, the Bible talks a lot about, well, not a lot, but it does talk about sex. We can see all kinds of interesting stories, some really astounding and shocking stories in the Old Testament. And Paul and even Jesus talk about marriage, and Paul goes into some topics about sex in some of his letters, and sexual relations and things like that between husbands and wives, and then even making pronouncements about what is certain types of sins. So all of that is a part of our biblical understanding and our theology. It's a part of our book that we follow. But in the late 90s, a particular movement happened that really actually has greatly changed the ideas about sexuality in just the last 40 years. And I think you guys either are going to connect with it, you might be a little surprised, but there is a reason that I'm going through this. It's not just a history lesson. So let's start. The term purity culture is generally associated with the white American evangelical Christian purity movement and the purity industry launched in the early 90s. Little side note, you guys know I've talked a lot about things that happened in the early 90s. We won't go through a whole history lesson again, but a lot of very interesting things happened in the church cultures in the 80s and 90s, and a lot of it it has to do with a reaction to things that were going on in society. We should always be aware that anything that is a very strong push one way will cause a push the other way. We need to be more careful to kind of to figure out what's in the middle there, because sometimes the really intense pushes will mess some people up. All right, this purity movement began when a group of Southern Baptist ministers met together in 1992 to create a curriculum in response to rising rates of teen pregnancies, sexually transmitted diseases, and the curriculum and campaign became known as True Love Waits. The next year, the publishing force, all the ones who put out the curriculum and all the stuff, it was the branch of the Southern Baptist Convention and their publishing force. Like I said, the America's largest Protestant denomination, they had charged up their people with curriculum and talking and ministers and youth pastors, getting the word out about this campaign, True Love Waits. And James Dobson, of course, was the biggest voice in evangelicalism at that time with his shows, his radio show, and all the other curriculums and books and stuff that he put out. And so it got everybody charged up so much that they went to Washington, and there was a huge rally, 25,000 young people, and they brought abstinence pledge cards. We will abstain until married, pledge cards, and they 210,000 of them, and they put them all out on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. It was a huge event, sort of a big launching of this movement that was pushed. Then books were published. One was called Lady in Waiting. The most famous one was a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris, who actually just in the last year or so has renounced that book, apologized for that book, and told the publishers, do not publish any more of this book, and recognized that it actually caused a huge amount of problems. He wrote it when he was 23 years old. He knew nothing about what he was doing, but he got into that loop, into that publishing world, into the industry. So these books and these ideas, this push increased the popularity of the movement. The purity movement became its own industry. They had their own Bible studies, their own Bibles, they had books, they had films, they had clothing, they had jewelry and events. Instead of proms, churches would hold purity balls where the dads would escort the daughters. There was a whole lot about the fathers and the daughters, fathers and daughters, a whole lot of that. This was, like I said, in the early 90s. My children were born all in the 90s, from 91 to 99. So when I experienced this, I was experiencing it. I was actually a youth pastor. A children's pastor at the time. Wasn't a youth pastor, and plus our church wasn't denominational. But I remember hearing about all this stuff, and I bet you guys did too, either with your kids in that age group, or you may have actually gone through it yourself. Like this industry was huge. The foundation of the purity movement was simple. Here are the basic principles. Because God created sex for marriage, it's important to abstain from any sexual contact prior to your wedding night. It sounds very simple, should be a simple thing. Hey guys, you should abstain. But it got much more complicated. In and of itself, this is nothing earth-shattering. Evangelicalism has always held to a no sex until married belief. You can find Bible verses, which we're not going to go into tonight, but that an idea behind the theology, which is abstain until married. Marriage is about a covenant between two people that is a mirror, supposed to be a reflection of the bride and the church. The church and relationship to God, and this in the sense of the covenant relationship of commitment, and then also just saying that sex is an important thing, and and you should hold it for marriage. So that's a basic idea. But the purity movement just pushed it so hard, doubled, tripled it. Not only does it require that all premarital sexual activity be avoided, like intercourse, but any and all forms of sexual expression that exist beyond the confines of a Christian marriage should not be entertained or tolerated. Now, I'm saying that I'm kind of probably go back and forth when I do this, because in some ways it was the True Love Waits movement back then, but it's also actually still going on today. I actually just listened to a guy talking about the book that he's writing, that's about to get published, that is still in the same publishing arm. They're still doing things, and they have a new name for it. So anyway, so it's still going on. So it happened, but it's also still going on. So anyway, so no form of sexual expression is tolerated. So any kind of touching, like fingers touching, hand holding, anything like that, no. Kissing, of course, off limits. Looking at each other or looking at someone, even if it's not a dating relationship, but just looking at someone or thinking the bad thoughts or having thoughts that might be considered lustful, or even just the idea. So it became confusing. Like, what is lust? When you're telling a middle school kid, don't lust, well, they may not even really have, or even high school or college, they may not really completely have an idea of what the extent of that is. Is that just a thought? Is it she's a nice girl or he's a nice guy? Oh, I kind of wouldn't mind going out with him. Oh my gosh, that's a terrible thought. So it became everything was so off limits that it became this huge amount of confusion as well. And it still does. The purity movement uses false promises, misinformation, and shame to persuade people to abstain from sex. I'm actually going to explain that very large statement that I just made. This meant no masturbation or lustful thoughts, boys or girls, no alone time with your boyfriend or girlfriend. So courtship became a big deal. People were talking about courtship a lot back then. It's still kind of in the news. You hear about the Dugars and their whole family. That was a big deal in the 2000s, and of course that's still kind of going on. We still hear about their family and stuff, but that was a really big deal. Women avoiding clothing that would make them a stumbling block to godly men in the church. That was a huge deal. And some took it a step further. Any kiss, hug, a caress you shared with a significant other, even in a nice, comfortable dating situation, it was other was a gift. If you shared it with a significant other, was a gift you were taking away from your future spouse or stealing from your future spouse. So all touches, all kisses, all looks, all thoughts should only be held in a perfect little box and given to the special someone when you got married. And if you didn't, then you were stealing from them. And that was an ungodly thing. That was a sin. This guy right here, Richard Ross, was the guy who started True Love Waits. He is still a part of it. And like I said, a new book is about to come out by Sean McDowell that they asked him to write. They have a new name for it. It's not True Love Waits anymore. It's called, oh crud. Oh man, I was going to remember. I didn't write it down. Oh dang, I forgot it. Anyway, but it's got a new name. They've changed the identity. They've changed the marketing, but it's still kind of the same. I'm actually going to read some reviews about the book because I'm very curious if they're going to continue with this intensity push. So we'll see. So while the goal, you know me, I am doing the Lord's work for you. I'll go look it all up, and so you guys don't have to. So while the goal of a biblical sexual ethic for Christians is a noble and necessary one, the core message of the purity movement is steeped in fear. We are to remain pure or else. You children, you young people, you're supposed to remain pure or else you are in sin. You are displeasing to God, and you are causing problems for other people, for your future spouse. The stakes are high, but the reward is great. If you both remain sexually pure prior to your wedding night, God will bless your marriage with an incredible guilt-free sex life. And for those of us on here who have been married, we all know that's crazy BS. But evangelicals don't have a monopoly on the ethics of purity culture. Mormons, they talk about worthiness instead of the word purity. Muslims talk about honor culture instead of purity culture. So the religious idea that is behind this is prevalent throughout the world. And so, as always, Christians, we should be doing a better job at this. In purity culture, gender expectations are based on a strict stereotype-based definition. So this purity culture pushes these ideas that I've been talking about a while, which is a complementarian view, which remember that's also started in the 90s, the biblical manhood and womanhood push. Watch my other teachings and read some stuff on that, because that was very big in the early 90s as well. So all of this mixes together with those ideas. Men are expected to be strong, masculine leaders of the household, church, and to a lesser extent society. Women are expected to support the men. They're supposed to be pretty and feminine, sweet and supportive wives and mothers, and basically be the undergirding to the great masculine leaders. Sexual expectations also vary by gender. Everyone is expected to abstain, remain sexless before marriage. That means, no sexual thoughts or feelings or actions. And upon marriage, everything's supposed to flip. Your sexual light switch flips on and everything is perfect on the wedding night is what you're kind of told. But these roles of men and women and what the expectations are, the gender differences, I will go more into. So if you were in a youth group or a college group or something in the 90s or the early 2000s, you would have been inundated with these messages of purity, and you would have been given examples of how to remain pure and these object lessons. So one youth pastor I read about, one girl talked about her youth pastor got up and had this pitcher of water and had this young teenage boy, hey, come spit in this beautiful clear pitcher of water. And another boy, you come spit in it. Another boy, you come spit in it. And then looks at the kid and says, okay, you come up and hey, you drink this. And of course everybody's like, ew, gross, I don't want to drink that. No, that's gross. And he didn't drink it. But this was like, oh, this is how we're giving an example of what is impure. It's this spitting kind of thing. And taking something, this beautiful liquid and putting something wrong in it. And then he would say, I want all you girls to know that every time you have sex with a guy before marriage, it's like having someone spit in this water pitcher. Don't you want to give your husband a clean pitcher of water on your wedding night? And the article, she said, people were like freaked out. The girls were super freaked out. A girl behind her started crying. And the idea, and she said, and he never said anything to the guys. Now that's not necessarily true of every single object lesson that was given, but there was more of a push for women to have this purity ideas. It was more of a push than it was for guys. A speaker might hold open a box of donuts. This was another example. Somebody saw their youth pastor do this, and he was trying to explain to a girl why it was she needed to stay careful and be more modest. So he took a box of donuts and held them up in front of his chest and leaned over, and that was to illustrate how cleavage could be this allure to boys. So basically, saying that women's body parts are like a donut. And it sounds ridiculous, but these were things that were done. And, like I said, I've been doing the Lord's work for you, been reading a lot of these articles. And I think some of us may have had some weird things happen or could tell stories ourselves about things like that it's the idea of women being objectified or even just young people being put into this place of giving these weird metaphors and these weird examples to say you have to stay pure, you have to, or God's going to be mad. And if you will just do this thing, if you will just keep your thoughts in check and keep your hands and your lips and everything else in check, then you'll be okay, and you'll get to that big moment, and then everything will be fine for you. Oh my gosh, men are taught that their minds are evil, and whereas women are taught more so that their bodies are evil. Now, I am saying this as part of the purity culture from the 90s, 2000s, but I will tell you very clearly, these are things that are still being taught to our young people today. I have young people that are, my own children. They go to churches that are, have a lot of young people, and they do a lot of huge, dating and how to date and how to be with, how to find your significant other. And because the churches that some of them go to are big churches that have a lot of young people, they teach these things a lot. So they're hearing these things, and then they tell me about it, and then we have to like go through and what do you call it? We have to work through it and figure out what the truth is behind these things, because it gets confusing when someone, a pastor, a man, is standing up in front of you telling you you have to be careful of these things. It becomes difficult to take in and difficult to weed through. So these ideas of men's minds are evil, women's bodies are evil, men's thoughts and actions are said to be either pure or impure, where women themselves, their bodies are either pure or impure. So it's about thoughts and actions for guys usually, but it's actually the actual bodies of women themselves that are causing these problems. And we can go all the way back to Aristotle for that. I don't have this quote up there, but he and his contemporaries actually referred to women as being deformities, and they are simply deformed men. They are monsters that cause problems, and I've referred to those quotes before. But those ideas continue on, women being a problem for men. Purity culture also teaches that women are responsible for their sexual thoughts, feelings, and choices men make, and so women must dress and walk and talk and just in just the right way so as not to inspire sexual thoughts, feelings, and actions in them. So remember, purity culture says, don't have any of these thoughts, but if you're having them, there must be a reason for them. So we'll find somebody to blame. It's probably those girls that you had class with earlier, or somebody that walked by you or something. The Dugars, actually, I read, have a thing that they do when they are walking together in a group. And of course, they have very big family units. And when they walk, the women or the wives, the adults, if they see something that they believe might be a hindrance to the thought life of the men in the group, they say a word out loud that's like the key word, the code word to let them know. I think at one point I read it was like Nike or something like that for one of their groups. So if they say that word, the men know they need to put their eyes down really fast. So can you imagine being a woman in that family or in that type of a culture your job is constantly to keep an eye out to protect your men, protect the guys, protect the teenagers, because if they accidentally see something, it might even be your fault. It may not even be them seeing you. You got to then protect them from everybody else. I mean, come on, y'all. They're going to make me cuss. That's some crazy stuff, right? If they do inspire such thoughts, they are said to be a stumbling block, women, and literally a thing over which men trip on their pathway to God. One of the most destructive aspects of purity culture is how it equates a person's worth and intimacy with God to how well they're able to resist temptation. In the way the church frames the purity conversation, it hits women, especially young women, the hardest. For men, it's considered normal to have problems with sexual thoughts or lust, but for women, it makes you dirty or impure. It is then framed as not being presentable and a pure bride for the godly man, her future husband. While a man's fight against lust is a valiant struggle against this nature, his nature usually accompanied with warfare illustrations, battle, and Braveheart quotes. Women that have similar desires, sexual desires, are treated as, oh, that's kind of weird. A woman has a sexual idea or a thought. It's peculiar. It's an abnormality to what is normal. So men can have something to fight, but women are like, oh, there's something kind of weird about you. And because men struggle with lust is framed as a battle, if they have a loss or a setback, it's we think of it, oh, it's a battle. They'll retreat. They'll be able to come back stronger, Braveheart, freedom. But the language we use to discuss female purity is not as forgiving. The illustrations for women and women's bodies have been things like it's like dirty water or chewed up bubble gum, a rose that's been plucked too soon, or as was told to me as a child, a piece of tape that's no longer sticky because every time you have sex or do something that's untoward, you're taking a little bit of the stickiness of the tape off, or a rubber band that's lost its elasticity. You don't really hear those kind of things about men. I'm not saying men don't have problems with all this. We're just focusing on women. If y'all want, we can get a man to do the men's purity culture thing. I've definitely read about that, but it does have more of an impact on women for a lot of these reasons. So that put the responsibility and the consequences of sexual activity on women. We have to control not only ourselves, but we have to control ourselves for the men, for not only the men who might be around us, but even the future husband that we are supposed to have, that God wants to bring to us. So don't mess it up, what he wants to bring. And like I said, this is continuing to go on to this day. I've had one of my children was attending a very large church several years ago, and they were about to go on a big retreat. And she told me that it's really hard to go on this big fall retreat that they go on. It's hard. I mean, you got to get in fast. So everybody in her girls' small group, they'd all wanted to go together. So then they started getting the paperwork, like, okay, we're going to go. And so what do you bring? You bring your Bible, you bring a pen, all this stuff. And one of the girls realized and told the group how this bothered her and said, well, well, how come it says all this stuff about what the girls can wear, but it doesn't have anything about the guys? This was like 4 years ago, you guys, in a major giant church down in Dallas. This wasn't like some little weird, backwoods church like 40 years ago. This was recently, and it's still going on. The girls are told what to wear and how to dress, and so my daughter and I discussed that at great length. Trying to figure out, because on the one hand you want to, you're just a young person and you want to kind of listen to your pastor and you kind of trust them, but on the other hand you're like, wait, something's not working here. What are they actually saying? And she had to kind of even work through that, because she was very trusting of them, and I had to say, okay babe, I just want you to know, hey, feel free to go on the trip, but you just need to know these are the things that you're being told, and you have to learn to fight against it, either inside yourself or and know the truth, or you might even have to say, I can't be a part of things that are like this. In a book called Pure, which is a look at the purity culture and it's what it has done, especially to women. A book that's recently come out, this lady, Linda Klein, says the cornerstone of the purity myth is the expectation that girls and women in particular will be utterly and absolutely non-sexual until the day they marry a man, at which point they will naturally and easily become his sexual satisfier, ensuring the couple will have children and never divorce. One man, one woman in marriage forever. Everything will be perfect. And a lot of it's put on the women. Women are portrayed as the root cause or the catalyst for men's deviant sexual behavior, from porn addiction to sexual assault. We're not going to go into it, but you guys know porn issues are huge. It is not going to end. It is bigger than anything I think most of us can imagine, and it will continue to get bigger. The church definitely needs to address it, but it is from very small children, addiction in very small children, all the way up to adults and women. Do not think it is a male issue. I know of a great many young women and older women and women who have addiction issues with porn. I'm telling you this not because trying to shock you. We need to understand it, either so that we can deal with it ourselves if it's something that we have an issue with, and we know that secular science tells us how much porn changes our brains and our relationships, but we need to realize that whether it's our own children or our grandchildren or the young people that we are involved with, as we pray for them, as we speak with them, as we talk with them and encourage them, you have to understand that these kind of things may be a part of their lives, or it's probably a part of, and don't think it's not happening with Christians. I guarantee it's happening with Christians. Many sermons have portrayed King David as seeing Bathsheba bathing on a roof as a ploy by Bathsheba to intentionally flaunt her naked body to seduce the king. So these ideas of women being the seducer will continue to be a problem. In March, just this last March, a man in Georgia killed 8 women in a massage parlor, and he told police it was because of his guilt over his sexual addiction. He blamed those women. He killed them. He said he had a sinful heart. He's from a major American denomination, Protestant denomination, and he described his action as having been sinful. He couldn't deal with it anymore, and his response to his guilt was to destroy the problem in his head. Women are sources of temptation or a sex object by the way they dress, speak, act in public, even when they have no intention of trying to cause arousal or sexual attention. In the attempt to honor women or put them in a nice place of we love women, we honor them, we want them to be taken care of. They're the ones who give birth to our babies. We don't want them, we want to be their protectors. This idea of men and the masculine man needing to protect the woman, it ends up over sexualizing women and their every aspects of their appearance and their personality. And all this is presented as coming from this highest possible authority, from God himself. God wants us to wait. True love will wait, so that you, woman, as the bride, we are the picture of the church. This is the picture that the Bible gives. So we are that epitome. So we have to stay pure for the bride, as a representation of the bride. Am I making sense? Y'all give me like a nod. Okay, something. Okay, so if you truly wanted to please God and walk a godly path and receive all of God's blessings, you had to walk out this purity lifestyle. When I started dating, these kind of things I wasn't in the purity culture, I was before that, but I had these kind of ideas had been pushed at me from different places. And it definitely did affect my dating life and eventually even my married life. I've only been married to one guy. We dated for 3 years and got married and had a baby within, what was it? 12 months, 13 months after we got married. So, you know, we were doing what we were supposed to do, being that good little Christian married couple, making babies. But man, I had stuff that was in my head that affected me for many, many years. And it took a long time to work through. And it had to do with these ideas of purity, these ideas of what I was supposed to be before. And so how did it carry through to what was happening in my married life? As you can imagine, this form of divine sexual purity, all of it coming from God and control, can have a significant impact on someone's mental health, especially if it's happening during your formative teen years. The Purity Movement's plan was designed to infect someone with the sickness of shame while simultaneously offering the antidote of Jesus. If you do these things, shame on you, but that's okay because you got Jesus and he'll take care of you. But man, shame outweighs that antidote so much. It's so hard for someone to say, oh, well, I'll just take this shame and give it to Jesus and then it's over with. It just doesn't work that way. Shame is more can coming into us more deeply than a lot of other traumas. And sometimes, and quite often shame comes from a place that we did not, most people would be like, oh, what's the big deal with that? But it can hit different people in different ways. And it's something that needs, you know, a deep dive. So then what happens is that people who believe that Jesus can take away their shame are also the ones crippled by the shame. Jesus can take away my shame. But he's also the one that's telling me that I have shame. But if I'm being told by the Holy Spirit that I should be shamed because I've done these things, which really probably wasn't Holy Spirit, is probably these, you know, some youth pastor or bad teaching or something, or book. But I also have to go to Jesus. So it's like going to the doctor who gave you the disease or something. It's just a really rough thing. It's hard to do. Brene Brown, who I'm not saying, you know, that you should follow everything Brene Brown teaches. She's pretty progressive. But in this book she talks about shame. When we experience shame, we feel disconnected and desperate for worthiness. When we're hurting, either full of shame or even just feeling the fear of shame, we are most likely to engage in self-destructive behaviors and to attack and shame others. Shame is highly correlated with addiction, violence, aggression, depression, eating disorders, and bullying. Shame is an intense feeling, you guys. And if you guys haven't had to deal with purity culture issues or these types of things, but other types of shame issues, it goes into deep places and can be a very dark and difficult place. Let me play this video for you from a documentary series that's been going on YouTube. There's only about 8 of them so far. They're like 1 or 2 minute little clips that are doing these little interviews in regard to the purity culture. The purity movement, the videos and books and work and doctoral theses that are coming out in regards to this right now is huge. And so you should ask yourself why. And it's because the people who went through that movement are all in their 30s, 40s, 50s right now, who started that where they were teens back in the 90s. So they're hitting their 30s and things and 40s and stuff. So it's a really big deal in their marriages. It's deeply affecting their lives and their marriage. Listen to this lady.
For 28 years, I taught at Seattle Pacific University in the Department of Marriage and Family Therapy. In that course, I asked my students to write their sexual autobiography. I started teaching the class in 1992. Right around the year 2000 or so, I started to notice that these stories dramatically changed. I was hitting the first wave of students that had hit the purity movement and the abstinence-only education program that was now unfolding over the United States. They described themselves as hating themselves, feeling perverted, feeling humiliated, disgusted. And I hadn't seen these levels of sexual shame at that rate ever before. And then as they would describe how they were functioning sexually now as adults, they described sexual dysfunction and trauma as if they had been sexually abused as children.
Okay, that's a huge that's a huge video to me. Just that one little clip, because this is someone who actually, is studying this and just like, kind of taking in this information, and all of a sudden notices this change and realizes that it's coming from people who have been in church, who have been in a place of of adults and parents and people saying to them, we want you to be okay. We want you to be healthy. We want you to, in a good way, trying to help them become closer to God, and be protected and protect them. And yet the extreme nature of their rules, their control, and their way of explaining it, or not explaining what was the truth of sexuality, with and men and women, was caused so much trauma that she and others now are seeing this behavior, and to where it became, they would then go to extremes in dealing with their shame and their trauma, their PTSD and things like that. What an interesting look at that. And she's just one voice. Like I said, I've been looking at a lot of this. A lot of other people smarter than me have been looking at it, and a lot of people have been doing it. So this culmination of this purity culture, what they're all told is that it's all about the wedding night. And the ideal Christian woman, because we're talking about women mostly, with this series, is depicted as one who remains pure and chaste until her wedding night, at which point she just becomes sexually ravenous for her husband. Everything's perfect. He's happy. She's happy. What's the problem? A woman's virginity is portrayed as that best gift a wife can give her husband. For those of us who have been married, we know marriage is a little deeper than that. The promise to young Christians is that and once again, let me tell you, this idea still being taught. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. The promise to young Christians is, if they just hold out a little longer, hold on, just keep your legs together and keep your lips in check, your fairy tales will all come true, and complete amazing wedding night sex and a lifetime of sexual and marital bliss. But this is all a lie. Say it with me. It's a lie, a lie. And speaking with young married couples, even recently, I have heard many say that they experience shame in their intimacy, even when they have gone into marriage as virgins. And those who have come in and had even just the smallest amount of experience with other dating partners or other partners on some level, if they go into it and then are taught these things and then become married in a nice Christian marriage, they deal with shame and trauma. I actually, a while back, spoke to one person who told me that she and her husband, and please don't try to guess who I'm talking about, because you guys don't know these people, but she and her husband had, because I know some of y'all know some people I know, but she and her husband had quite a lot of shame when they got married, in their intercourse and in their intimacy times, and they had good, everything was good. They talked through all of their past, but just the two of them together, they had to work through shame and trauma issues. And it was simply, and she could point out that it was the church culture that they had been in, and different ones, like some college things for one of them, and church stuff for another one, and it was still affecting them. And these are young people. This is still happening. This push for these purity issues that flip on in somebody's mind, and for men and women, not just a girl thing. But many Christian couples struggle through the transition of going from dating, where you're always holding back, to becoming married, and what it's supposed to look like then. And it can cause difficulties with them for months, years after their wedding night. I actually believe that after a couple gets married, that somebody needs to get to them like about a week later and say, okay, let's have some discussion. Let's talk. Let's work through some stuff. And then maybe a month after that, let's talk through some stuff again. Somebody that they feel like they can talk to about some stuff, because it's complicated. And as we know, intimacy issues are some of the biggest difficulties, fights, that, and money and religion, politics, things like that. But money and sex and kids are the biggest thing we all fight about in our marriages. And some of that, no matter how long you've been married, can go on for a long time. The idea of staying pure for marriage implies impurity after marriage as well. So if you go in and you're impure, you've maybe done something, you've already had a relationship with someone, maybe even you guys, it was from an abuse issue. Somebody abused you. You might have been raped. You might have had trauma from an abuse. It may not have been anything you even chose to do, or it may have been something that happened and then you got saved and then you ended up finding a wonderful Christian spouse. And but you're not pure. Or let's say you went through a divorce. So this doesn't make any sense to say, well, the Bible says this, because we know that there's widows that remarry. There's people who have been divorced that remarry. And so, obviously they're not in the pure place of never having had sex before. So these ideas are false ideas. Now, I am definitely for staying, pure in the sense of not having sex until you get married, if that's a viable thing when you're a young person. But obviously, like I said, widowhood or divorce or different things that happen in your life may mean that you don't go into that. But to put all of this pressure onto that purity, the pureness of the act of sex, is ridiculous. It's unbiblical. It's not true. And as I've been showing you with my little statistics and my little videos, it messes people up. It just messes you up. And that's my very unprofessional way of saying it. So the allure of a post-wedding sex becomes this sacred object and idol. But after we obtain the idol we are not satisfied, because it's just this one moment, and we'd make this one moment the all or nothing kind of thing. We could go into a whole other thing about idolatry of it. We're not going to. Young people, even in the best of marriages, describe feeling ashamed of their body, and sex becomes a demoralizing experience. What we have been told about our minds and hearts and bodies is not what purity truly is. The way this word purity is being used is not how it's used in Scripture. I'm not going to go into a big deep teaching on purity. I would encourage you to do so, and what the word pure truly means. It's definitely not a word that should be used in this particular ideology. But also, in addition, the American Evangelical Christian purity movement, it does have a different application when it's to people of color. People of color who are dealing with the issues of this have said white women, American women, may feel they unfairly they must unfairly maintain the purity they are assumed to have been born with. American women of color and women from other cultures may feel they must attain purity, as it is not something they are assumed to have been born with within the subculture. That is a big deep dive that we're not going to go into, but it is an interesting aspect if you are a person of color, or if you're helping someone walk through this. The way that they feel that people view them, whether they're pure or not. Like I said, white women will tend to feel they have to maintain purity. I'm going to stay pure. But women of color are told, well, you're already on some level impure for whatever reason. The racism, there's a whole very deep dive into all that, but mostly it's a racist push on them that they have to come into purity because they're already in some way impure, just because of the fact that they're a person of color. So the racism that they experience is already there. Then on top of that, they have sexual purity issues as well. How'd I do with that one, Deborah? That was weird. The white heterosexual traditional or father and mother in their proper place roles, American family has been considered by many the stabilizing force of America. So we got white people. Oh, you got to read the book Jesus and John Wayne. It'll take you through a history of these traditions that'll blow you away. But this white heterosexual traditional husband, wife, in their little roles, this kind of thing, it's considered the stability of the nation. We have to keep everyone in this nice, stable place. And every time it begins to move away from that, for instance, in the early 70s, women began to become more free. We had the Mary Tyler Moores that are out there, changing the world, and women are having more freedom, and they're getting divorced, or they're on the pill, or different things like that, and so things are getting shaken up. And so then we have the biblical manhood and womanhood. No, we got to get people back into order, because this is what will take care of our culture. And each time a change comes to in our history, instability arises. The church wanted to put more rules and these biblical roles, and of course that involves purity, into place to counter them. And so saving sex until marriage was a solution that embodied all of these negative issues. So there was, like, we had racial justice marches in the 60s, the feminist movement, the 70s, equality coming into the workforce, men and women, equal pay and stuff like that. Women were able to get the pill, and so it appeared that, oh, they have the ability now to be as promiscuous as men. Oh my gosh, women with choices. Then we had the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, and then divorce rates were rising. So they needed to put some kind of more of a box in place. They were already doing it with men and women in their roles in church. We have to stabilize America. The Russians are coming. We got to get things stable. That sounds stupid, but you guys, I've been reading and studying a lot of this stuff. That is what was going on. And so the churches in their sermons, these are the kind of things that they were talking about. These were these solutions to achieve the best possible life, to stay pure. God will bless the family, and God will bless our nation. So if we keep everything in this nice, neat little box of what the family is supposed to look like according to our beliefs, a couple of men's beliefs, and believe me, it was just a few men. I've already told you that story. Then God will bless us, and God will take care of us and protect us from the Russians and the terrorists and those crazy women who want to have sex with everybody, and abortion. And I am against abortion, but I mean, everybody was freaking out, and they still are. And you may have heard this. Oh my gosh, y'all, just as proof that this is still going on, you may have heard about the song and the music video that was released the week of the Southern Baptist Convention last month. And it was played at their meeting. Oh, look, we got a new song. It's by this really great music artist named Matthew West, who I don't know who he is, but apparently he's got a Grammy or something. And it's called Modest is Hottest. And he made this video with his daughters and his wife, who should have slapped him, but saying this parody song about how modesty is what we want, and I, as your father, want you to dress this way. You look at them in their black shirts, and it was supposed to be funny, he said, and some people got the joke, but most of us didn't. One pastor, a male pastor, said telling them to dress a certain way to be less attractive is reverse body shaming. We are in essence telling them that they should be uncomfortable with who they are because of what others, namely men, think of their body. Matthew West took that video down. he got way too much, but his basic, he apologized, but he also said, it was just a joke, you guys. And a lot of other people thought the same thing. But the point is, it's continuing to put this impetus on the women to take care of the men, and they need to just stay modest. The modesty culture, the problems with modesty culture made women responsible for men, I should say in the present tense, makes women responsible for men, holds women and girls responsible for what is in a man's mind or what they do. Look what you made me do, it says. Women must control themselves in order to prevent a man from doing something that he has almost no control over doing, is what is the idea that's presented. This makes men into infants. They're children. That's and it's not right. It makes my husband mad, my son mad. Other men I know say, I'm not a child. I don't need you to be responsible for me. I can control myself. And men are not helpless, and we shouldn't treat them that way. This idea of boys will be boys, which came out in the news, a while back. Those ideas, that locker room talk that men should be allowed to do is ridiculous. Modesty, the problem is modesty culture is hyper focused on rules, legalism. Women have all the rules, of course, not the guys. Length of shorts, tightness of shirts, no bikinis. Of course, 1 Timothy 2:9, we actually talked about that a while back, that this verse is taken out of context. That talks about how women dress. I want women to dress modestly, with decency, and nice hairstyles and things like that. That had to do with the luxury of women who were wealthy coming in and being in the same church with women who were in poverty, and Paul saying, you guys stop. You guys are like, you're separating each other. I want you guys to be together and see that Jesus is the center of your church, and not who's got the most money. And because it was obvious based on hairstyles and stuff, that was a particular cultural issue that we're now taking and using to push this modesty culture on women. Modesty culture is personal and hurtful to impose it on teenagers who are already struggling with their body, the heavy yoke of dealing with their own body. And of course, if you're a heavier girl, if you got some curves, there's extra stress and legalism, because men are so visual. So you should be smaller and skinnier and more appealing in the way you dress. And oh, hey, you should smile. Why aren't you smiling? So if you have large bosoms versus small, if you need to be attractive and feminine, that's what's expected. And of course, if you got curves, whoo, you are causing men problems. Our unique bodies are not celebrated, and it adds to the burden of women. Like I said, this video that came out that's making these jokes and these ideas that are being continued pushed in churches, and is that women are a problem. Modesty culture sexualizes children. It makes their the issues with them more difficult. Why were our authority figures telling children that their bodies were a temptation to men? Children, you can be a child, like a little bitty kid, like 6 years old, but even into your teen years, you are still a child. And if youth pastors, men pastors, or male pastors, even women can do this to you too, telling you're sexualizing other men. That can be confusing to a child. They're still trying to figure out what all this stuff is that we got on us. And so what do you mean people are looking at it? I can't even figure out how to keep it in check here. What's going on? So that it's confusing, and it's sexualizing, and it messes up our kids. And wives then become afraid that their husbands are looking around, being tempted. And if we're taught that it's our job to cater to our husband's sexual needs, then the idea is that he has needs that have to be met. So he's looking at other women, and that's if we're not meeting his needs, then it's our fault, and he has then probably is going to go find somebody else. And that's, I was actually told that when I was younger. Other women become competition. The strict set of rules were reinforced by biblical messaging. Got to dress modestly. Don't be a stumbling block. I don't know where that verse is. Avoid one-on-one interactions. The Billy Graham rule. Don't be alone with a woman. She could tempt you, or somebody could blame you, or she could falsely accuse you. So think about that. If you're a woman who wants to, get a job, but you can't even, or you want to get trained, like Mary sat at the feet of Jesus. You want to get trained to be a Bible teacher or learn the word or something. You can't even go to the pastor and talk to him. Keep your thoughts pure, because you can be unfaithful even in your mind. I'm not saying that people aren't stupid. We're all humans, and we got to be smart, you guys. I'm just saying that if you make big giant rules, the Billy Graham rule or the Mike Pence rule or whatever it is, and say you cannot be alone with the opposite sex, it puts such a strict regulation on you that it over sexualizes every interaction that you have. Then by requiring outward displays of commitment like purity rings or pledges, true love weight pledges, the young person feels shame if they're broken. Now, on the other hand, I don't have this in my written down, but something I thought about, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a little reminder of something, little tokens. We do that. We all love little tchotchkes we put around our house. We write notes, scriptures to remind us of things, little things, so for some people, a ring is not necessarily a bad thing, but to make it everybody and to make big ceremonies, it doesn't work for everybody. My daughter the other day told me that every single girl that she was friends with, that was a Christian girl, which most of her friends were Christians, good, Bible church people, all of them had purity rings. All of her friends did. And she said pretty much all of them broke those purity rings. We did not do that in our family. We did not have a thing with any of that. She really didn't even understand what any of it was, but she remembers all of her friends having those things. But like I said, for some, those things are okay. Like I said, commitments and tokens and things like that can work for some people. It's just, it can be restrictive and bad as well. But these strict guidelines, lustful thoughts, or even kissing, or the guidelines, or even having been a victim of abuse or harassment, it brings shame, and it becomes internalized, and then it becomes a part of a person's identity. And then trauma is considered um, easier to overcome than a sense of shame. Shame goes directly into our hearts and where we feel our worth and our value, and it can tear it apart. And we have to help people not only protect them from ever having to experience shame, but if they are, or you guys, if you have experienced this type of shame because of these types of issues, because of bad teaching or that kind of thing, it's not your fault, but it can tear you apart, and it's something we want to deal with either for ourselves or that we want to help the young women around us deal with, and get free from. The impact of the purity culture for a woman, especially, is dehumanizing, as she must remain utterly asleep, starve her desires for romance or sexuality until a prince comes along to wake her up and give her the beautiful kiss that she's been longing for. But of course, those are all crazy Disney-eyed versions. The prevailing idea in the purity literature is that men are expected to desire sex while women only desire emotional intimacy. So when women do have sexual desires, we're very confused because none of the books tell us that. and actually, there's a book that I'm going to talk about at the end that they did a very big study. I've talked about it before, and they looked at a lot of marriage books, and these books are messed up the way they describe intimacy in men and women and what women should do just to placate men and their desires, and consent is never brought up, and the joy of singleness is never brought up, and men are still called to battle that desire, and the cost of losing the battle is not as severe for them as it is for women. Of course, we have even the issues of we can get pregnant. We have an outward display of something that could bring shame to us that other people, that men wouldn't have to deal with. There's a sense then that if men engage in sex before marriage, there's more grace for their actions because they are supposedly biologically wired to desire sex above all else. Women, however, have much more to lose if they engage in sex before marriage. They're used up, they're damaged goods, they're ruined. Sexual desire and temptation is considered a male issue. Very little writing, if ever, is ever addressed about women and their desires. In most of the purity movement literature, there's a silence about the desire that women have for sex, and it messes up a whole lot of marriages. It says they do not actually desire it. So when girls inevitably do experience some sort of desire, whether it's before marriage or after, it messes their brains up. They have been taught that this is not even a possibility. All the literature says that, and their counseling, the preachers that are in front of them say it. The ideas that address it, it's just not there for them. That they don't have the counsel of it. So shame that is associated with the purity movement is based in fear. Of course, shame comes from this fear. The ideology pushes threats of what might happen to a woman and her relationships if she chooses to have sex before marriage. It can cause her parents to be ashamed of her. It can give her flashbacks, she's told, or ruin her testimony. It can give her spiritual pain. Of course, the impurities that are in her. She could be rejected by her future husband, or just be separated from God. All of those ideas are there. And if we put these burdens of purity onto young people, onto young women, it hinders their ability to understand God's love and grace. When people are filled with shame and self-loathing, their low self-esteem takes precedence in interactions with others. It dominates and eclipses a person's ability to see and love one another. So shame creates in women a sense of isolation and fear, which causes both sexual and emotional problems. And shame can inhibit another feeling, the feeling of being loved. Even in the greatest of marriages, you can have a block that you cannot understand how much he can love you because you feel ashamed. You feel some level of shame. We talk about purity wrong. We talk about purity and it's virginity. Virginity is what purity is, and that is not what purity is. That is not what the Bible means. We tell people that purity is all about what they do with their body, as if it's something that can be lost. Having sex, whether it's from a one night stand or even in a marriage, does not make you impure. What makes us pure is not what we do with our bodies. It's what Jesus did with his body. He was willing to die. He was willing to be naked on the cross. Remember Adam and Eve? Remember what they did as soon as they ate that fruit? They immediately covered themselves up that when they saw their nakedness. Jesus went on the cross and was willing to be completely displayed and naked for us. He took on that shame that we no longer have to feel like Adam and Eve felt. Stressing virginity makes it sound like once you've failed, there's no point in even trying anymore. Think about it, you guys. In Catholicism, the Virgin Mary is the highest name that you could say, I guess, that you're praying to and things like that. The Virgin Mary. And then, of course, wearing white on your wedding day. I actually had somebody say, that they were helping with a wedding, and the bride, I said, oh, did she have a nice dress? And they said, yeah, it was, it was pretty, it was white, it was this and that, but she lives with him, so I don't know why she was wearing white. And you're like, oh my gosh, I mean, this is the idea that women are supposed to do, right? You're supposed to be presented by your father to your groom wearing white, and be the epitome of purity. Everything about that day is all about the purity, the whitest gown. So, talk about some stress, you guys. It makes purity into this legalism. So we can't talk about purity as a physical issue when it's really supposed to be a heart issue. It's about the heart, not the hymen. Sorry about that, you guys. I threw out that word. Of course, for our own sakes and for the sake of righteousness, God wants us to wait until we're married. He does. It is the most healthy. It is spiritually what he asks us to do. But he also understands that we're human. The same way he understands that we're human when we are angry, when we gossip, when we're hateful, when we are greedy, when we drink too much alcohol, or smoke too many cigarettes, or gamble too much, or all the other bad things that a person can do that have nothing to do with sex, but are also sinful as well. That are impure in our relationship with God. But what he wants even more is he wants people to come to him with a pure heart, an eager heart for a real relationship with him. He looks to our heart, which is our purity, and not our outer appearances like our hymen, and he wants us to come and relate to him that way. That's the teaching we need to make sure that we're helping our young people, our boys and our girls especially, understand. And stressing purity of the heart over virginity is what we have to do. Let's help the young people around us to understand that God's heart, we need to connect with God's heart first, and we need to teach them about loving him with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, our bodies as well. And all of those things, loving God and then loving our neighbor, is all incorporated into the idea of purity. It's about our heart. So we need to not talk so much about virginity and talk more about what is your relationship like with God? What is the guy that you're dating, what's his relationship like with God? And how are you guys learning how to connect with one another? When we let shame define us, we often hide. If we feel shame for something, we need to find someone to help us. You are not alone. If you feel shame, or somebody who feels shame, help them to understand that they are not alone. They're not the first person that feels that, and you can help them. You can talk with them. You want to listen to them, and you want to help them, or help them find somebody to talk to. If you do something wrong, or if something wrong was done to you, it's crucial to realize that those things do not have to define you, or we can help other people to understand. You are precious. The people around you are precious. Help them to know that they are precious, and that know that you are precious. You may have regrets about your past, but that doesn't mean you need to carry any shame with you. Help other people to know that too. Doesn't mean you have to live with bad decisions now. You can turn things around every new day. His mercies are new every day. Surrender shame to Jesus. Work through the issues. Be honest about your shortcomings, not just about sexual issues, but about all of our issues. We're supposed to bring them to the Lord. Our anxieties, our fears, bring them to the Lord. And then surround yourself with a community that can help you. If you don't have people around you who can help you, then find somebody or get away from them. You have my permission to leave them. You have my permission to leave a community or a church, or if you can, the family that is causing this kind of shame or pain, and help someone to help you with the new decisions that you're making. Find somebody to help you. Go and be free, and bring other women with you to freedom. You're going to be okay. let's deal with these issues, because they're not only, like I said, from 30 years ago, but they're also right here in front of us, happening right now. Women, help each other be free. Here are a couple of book recommendations and a blog. I'm only going to give you a couple tonight. Sheila Ray Gregoire was the book that I was talking about, The Great Sex Rescue. They interviewed thousands of women, and they looked at books, Christian books about marriage, and they saw that Christian women in their marriages, they weren't getting because of bad teaching, because of bad understanding of what intimacy was supposed to look like. They weren't happy. Their marriages were unhappy, and it's continuing. These things are, these ideas, these false ideas of intimacy and purity and virginity, and all those things are being still continuing to be pushed. So we have to fight it. We have to fight it one little battle at a time, one little YouTube video at a time, one little lesson at a time. Marg Mausko as well. She's got great teachings. If you just go to her website, Marg Mausko, I think I spelled that right. She has got some great stuff as well. Let me get out of this. Does anybody have any questions? Remember, you have to unmute. Anybody have any questions? I'm sorry I went so long. Anything anybody wants to talk about? Did I scare you, Jessica? Jessica's run away. Lina, yes.
I just wanted to make a comment when you were talking about all the shame and, obeying all the rules that they set out. It reminded me of what Paul said about the law, how we can put laws on everything we do, every moment, every movement. But he said that the law was just to show us how sinful we were. And that just made me think of that, because, it's pointing to that, but it's in our heart. It's not so much, comes out of the heart. We're going to act on it or think it or whatever, say it.
Yes.
So anyway, that was all.
Very good point. Very, very good point. Yes. Yes. Yeah. We focus too much on one thing, people tend to go to another extreme. For instance, right now, some of the biggest issues have to do with, gender identity. And so churches are pushing really hard against, that agenda, the liberal agenda of transsexuality and homosexuality and the gender identity issues. And some of it does need to be addressed. I'm not saying it doesn't.
Yeah.
The sex change operations and some of the literature and curriculums and things like that are being pushed. But we also have to be really careful, because our young people, even the ones in our churches, our Christian young people, have a different understanding. We've talked about this before, have a different understanding about gender than we do from, our 40s and 50s and things like that. So it's been presented to them differently. We have to address it. We have to be gentle, and we have to be kind, and we have to hear God individually, because churches are actually driving young people away from the church, because we are continuing to hit these things so hard, just like we hit the sexual revolution issues hard. We hit the gender identity stuff too hard, and not that we can't be truthful, not that we shouldn't go back to the word, but we also have to wrestle with them through these ideas. So be willing to go walk it out and not just scream, what are the rules that we think that are out there? Anybody else?
I was asking Jessica, did I, did I do that? Did I do that? Did I kind of go through that? It's like, well, no, not you per se, but you did send us to me and Glow to this thing at TW that was kind of like a purity thing. And we spent the night, and I was like, oh, and then she was telling me about the church that she went to on Wednesday nights. They really stress purity. Yeah. So it's still today is still going on. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. So what happens is we go, oh, we're just going to send our kids to church. We're going to go have them, let them, oh, the kids are going to go hang out at that church. It's a good church. You know what? You got to be like a Stacie. You have to go in and go, what are you teaching tonight? Tell me about that. What curriculum did you get? Where did you get that curriculum? Who said that? I mean, I and my sister and I are kind of well known for this. We're annoying as hell. We will bug you to find out where you got that, and then we will question you, and people don't like us. That's why I end up being a youth pastor. I just might as well take care of it myself. But we tend to be trusting, and you don't know what might happen. My son went to a meeting one time, and the youth pastor was telling them all that, showed him some video about how the Noah's Ark had been found, and all these. This is ridiculous. And my son came home. He was so excited. Mom, they found Noah's Ark. And I said, no, they didn't. And he goes, no, Mom, really? He showed us a video. And he said there was this sign. I said, no, he didn't. Nope. I said, here, just 1 second. So I looked it up, and I, went through all this stuff. And then I sent a little that youth pastor did not like me anymore because I challenged him, because he had some weird ideas about stuff. And he should be what are you talking about finding freaking Noah's Ark? That's ridiculous. They didn't find it. But anyway, but yeah, I'm that kind of person. But we have to be willing to challenge those kind of views, or look it up, or help them through it, because it's amazing that one little tweak that can cause someone to go in a different direction or have a weird understanding. And a lot of it we can't help. You don't know. You can't help everything. You can't, you don't want to be a helicopter parent that hovers over, every single thing that your child takes in, or your grandchild potentially. But do what you can. You do what you can, and have the conversations, just keep having the conversations about it all. So Deborah, as you well know, I have personally talked to my children in the last couple of days, because I've been going through all this stuff, and I've talked to 3 out of my 4 so far to say, okay, I just want you to know I probably messed up, and I'm really sorry. And if I said anything wrong, and, and we've had the conversations, which was really good though. It gave me a chance to, thankfully, they didn't tell me I'd done anything near as bad as what you had done, Deborah. I'm just kidding.
Oh, it wasn't so bad.
I haven't screwed him up either. But anyway, but it was good. It was good because I was worried. I was like, I don't know what they may have heard. So some weird little thing that I said. So anyway, okay. Anybody else? Jessica, I can hear you. Okay, so I will cut off. I will say a prayer, and we will end this tonight. I think I'm only going to be doing 1 more week before we are supposed to take a break until the fall semester. So I'll check in on all that. But I've kind of run out of topics, you guys. I don't think I've hit, we've done homosexuality and gender and sexual purity and Bible translations. I don't know what else is there for me to talk about. Although next week I may talk about the eternal subordination of the Son. So let's go into the really deep theology. Y'all are gonna love that. Okay, so we'll see about next week. But I will keep up with you. Let me go ahead and pray. Father, thank you so much for these ladies who were able to join, for others who are going to be watching later on the replay, Lord, because I just want everybody to know that that as we dive deeper into who you are, that even though it's confusing and we're just doing our best to try to serve you, Lord, I ask for you to release us of shame from false teaching. Help us to help others, other women and even young men to walk into true ideas of what a pure relationship is with you, and have good, healthy sexual identities and intimacy, but also be able to just walk in freedom and not walk in any kind of shame. And I ask for you to bless these ladies and give us a good evening tonight. And I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.